At the end of the 20th century, much of the focus was on Nostradamus' predictions that 1999 would be a crucial year in human history, perhaps the dawn of the apocalypse, the beginning of the end. But those who speculated that 1999 would mark the last days of mankind or the end of time should have learned from history. The same thing happened at the previous millennium back in 999. People were convinced that the first day of the year 1000 would be Judgment Day. Mass suicides, religious ecstasy and delirium raged across Europe. And it was exactly the same on the 1st of January 2000. Things quickly got back to normal when people realized that day one was just another day. It is true that there is a heavy dose of doom and gloom in Nostradamus. But it is often overlooked that Nostradamus also foretold a time of spiritual renewal and peace on earth. For our environment, he predicted a golden age. After blue skies turn acrid, people embraced the sky, sea and land. He said, "We will communicate with dolphins. The animals with great pains and jumps will come to speak. There will be a reversal of the aging process." Humans will finally set foot on Mars, the beginning of another great leap forward in science and technology. And 4 years later, look for the first woman to be elected President of the United States. Apart from the author of the Bible and William Shakespeare, no one has enjoyed a longer run on the bestseller list than This Man Who Saw Tomorrow. And yet, Nostradamus remains a controversial figure. For millions, the name is synonymous with mystery, superstition, black magic, the occult or outright hoax. Just who was this strange man who has mesmerized the world for nearly 500 years? And how did Nostradamus seemingly master time? Michel de Notre Dame in French, or Nostradamus in Latin, was born on December 14, 1503, in the small town of Saint-Rémy in France. He died in 1566 in Salon, exactly the way he predicted he would. More than a century after his death, according to legends, town officials moved his grave, but couldn't resist the temptation to peek inside the coffin to see if Nostradamus really left behind a key to his coded quatrains, as rumors said. To their astonishment, they found a medallion resting on the skeleton's chest. Engraved on the medallion were the numerals 1700, the exact year the coffin was opened. 134 years after Nostradamus' death. The terrified officials immediately resealed the coffin, well aware of the curse Nostradamus had left behind in C10Q7. The man who opens the tomb when it is found and does not close it immediately, unexplainable evil will come to him. Others, not so wise, will pay for their foolishness. In 1791, during the French Revolution, Drunken looters smashed open Nostradamus' reburied casket. The bones of the prophet were tossed about in a gruesome dance. One looter thought he had to test the legend, claiming anyone who drank from the seer's skull would inherit Nostradamus' amazing clairvoyant powers. The following day, the looters were caught in a trap, and the looter who had dared violate the skull was among the first to die a quick and cruel death. To this day, both believers and doubters alike give Nostradamus remains the respect they deserve and stay away. Such was the power of Nostradamus. Following his grandfather's footsteps, Nostradamus became a medical doctor, just in time to confront the most horrifying events of medieval times, Le Charbon, or the Black Plague. His then revolutionary method of treatment included clean water and bedding, fresh air, and herbal remedies. His healing skills saved thousands from certain death. Many believe that Nostradamus acquired his healing skills from his visions of the future, in which he saw advanced methods of hygiene and medicine. For example, in one quatrain, Nostradamus mentions Louis Pasteur by name, nearly 300 years before the scientist's birth, a revelation that has silenced Nostradamus' critics ever since. About the same time, the news spread of his incredible second sight. One famous story tells how the prophet met a group of lowly friars on the road one day. He immediately fell to his knees and kissed the robe of the most humble monk. Asked why, Nostradamus replied, "I must bend my knees before His Holiness." 40 years later, and 19 years after Nostradamus' death, that monk became Pope Sixtus V. In 1550, Nostradamus started cashing in on his amazing psychic powers by publishing the first of several annual almanacs that included a prophecy per month for the coming year. This is how Nostradamus described his method of telling the future. Sitting alone at night in the study, a brass bowl rests on a tripod. A small flame comes out of the emptiness, makes happen successful which would have been in vain. Experts say that Nostradamus learned the technique of staring into the brass bowl, studying the ancient oracles. Only very seldomly did Nostradamus mention specific dates, 1999 being one of the most famous exceptions. although he says he could easily have done so. The reason for this, and the reason why predictions are so deliberately vague, is because the Inquisition suspected him of witchcraft. His very survival depended on not to provide the Inquisition with any concrete proof. Most of Nostradamus' later years were devoted to a collection of prophecies intended to foretell the future of mankind until the end of time. Despite the threat of the Inquisition, Nostradamus' fame grew. Especially the nobility demanded his uncannily accurate horoscopes and advice. One of his biggest admirers was the French Queen, Catherine de' Medici. An early quatrain, CIQ 35, stunned the Queen and her court, and more than anything else, established Nostradamus' lasting reputation as a remarkable prophet who saw things that were hidden to others. The young lion will overcome the older one on the field of combat in a single fight. He will pierce his eyes through a golden cage. Queen Catherine was convinced that the older lion represented her husband, King Henry II, and that it foretold his gruesome death, but the king didn't believe it. In 1559, thousands gathered for a royal wedding and tournaments that included jousting. King Henry, with his shining armor and lion-emblazoned shield, won bout after bout. After each victory, he raised the visor on his golden helmet to accept the cheers of the crowd. Finally, the king faced the younger Count Montgomery, who also exhibited a roaring lion on his shield. The king's luck ran out. A splinter from the other lance pierced through Henry's visor, ripped through his left eye, and lodged in his brain. Henry was also wounded in the throat. He was in agony for 10 days before he died, thus fulfilling Nostradamus' prophecy. And there was more to the story. In C3Q30, Nostradamus also predicted, "He who struggled with a weapon in a warlike deed will carry off the prize from one greater one than he. One night, 6 will bring harm to his bed. Naked, without his armor, he will suddenly be surprised." Technically, de Montgomery was pardoned for accidentally killing King Henry in the tournament, but a vengeful Catherine vowed to get even. Years later, she sent 6 henchmen to drag the Count from his bed, naked, in the dead of the night and execute him. Another prophecy had come true. In June 1556, Nostradamus suffered a severe attack of gout. He sensed the end was near. Many years earlier, he had already described his death. It came true, as on the night of the 2nd of July, his secretary, de Chauvigny, stopped in to say goodnight. Nostradamus replied, "You will not find me alive by sunrise." In fact, the next morning, Nostradamus' family and friends found him dead, his body on the floor between his bed and a bench. Nostradamus was buried upright inside a wall of the local church. On his tomb was inscribed, "Here rest the bones of the illustrious Michel de Notre Dame. Alone of all mortals, judged worthy to record with his near divine pen, under the influence of the stars, the future events of the entire world. He lived 62 years, 6 months and 17 days. He died at Salon in the year 1566. Let not posterity disturb his rest. Anne Possard de Mel wishes her husband true happiness. And so it ended. Did it? Today, there's an almost universal curiosity over what Nostradamus actually foresaw about the world we live in. There's even more intense speculation about his predictions for our future. Not everyone is willing to accept his forecasts as reliable until they actually happen. But few can argue with the uncanny accuracy of his predictions regarding events that happened in our past. If popular mythology is to be believed, almost every major event that has occurred since his death was foretold in his strange verses. That claim may be exaggerated, but if only a portion of what he predicted about the past is true, then he is more than qualified to serve as a guide to our future. What follows are some of Nostradamus' famous predictions of past events that came true. By studying yesterday, we may get a better handle on tomorrow, and thus seize the power to change the future before it happens. As previously stated, one of Nostradamus' most famous hits is C1Q25, in which he specifically mentions a scientist from the future by name, Louis Pasteur. It reads, "The lost thing is discovered, hidden for long centuries. Pasteur will be celebrated almost as a god. This will happen when the moon completes her great cycle, but he will be dishonored by other rumors." In addition to the name, Nostradamus also provided a time frame. In astrological terms, the moon's great cycle covered the period between 1535 and 1889. Pasteur opened his famed Paris Institute in 1888. Pasteur's research about infectious diseases, germs and bacteria changed the future of medicine, as did his work on pasteurization and vaccines, which has been named after him. For example, the following prediction was not part of the quatrains, but was found in his papers following his death. Many read it as another remarkable bullseye. Another blow, great town, half-staved anew. The feast of the blessed Saint Bartholomew, engraved into the bottoms of your heart. At Nîmes, Rochelle, Genève, Montpellier, Castres and Lyon. Mars on his Aryan way shall wager all on noble ladies' part. Obviously, Queen Catherine had given a secret order to murder all leaders of the Protestant movement. Some scholars are convinced that this refers to a horrible event only 6 years after Nostradamus' death in 1566. History now knows this event as the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. The facts are murky, but apparently Queen Catherine gave secret orders to wipe out all the Protestant leaders in France, which, not coincidentally, included most of her political enemies, in one great bloodbath. Before the slaughter ended, some 8,000 people died exactly in those cities Nostradamus named.